My name is Michael Goldberg. I'm the professor for our course Beyond Silicon Valley, Growing Entrepreneurship in Transitioning Economies. This is our second panel discussion on the role of donors and philanthropy in supporting entrepreneurship. Thank you so much, all of you, for all of your great discussion forum posts, personal learning assignments. It's been a great discussion. We're up to almost 12,000 of you are in the course right now. And many of you are spreading the word because the numbers keep growing. So we're so thrilled to have you as part of the class. As we do each week, I'll quickly ask our panel to introduce themselves. So I'll start with our local panel here in Cleveland and then go to our remote panelists and then get right to your questions. So Mike, if you want to start.
Sure. I'm Mike Belcito, was the co-founder of eFuneral, which is a startup that was based right here in Cleveland, Ohio, for about 3 years. Actually, just recently wound down eFuneral. Technically, we sold many of our assets to a big life insurance company. I wouldn't call it a big win of a sale. There are no press releases issued, but it was an amazing experience going through those 3 years and to really start with an idea and take it through to the very end was one that I would never take back. So I've been involved in startups for the last 10 years, including eFuneral, and am very involved in the local startup community here in Cleveland.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Anand?
Great. I'm Anand Swaminathan. I'm a managing director with Accenture, but from an entrepreneurship perspective, I am an angel investor, and for the last 5 years, living in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley, I've invested in about 38 companies that all focus on different aspects, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's fintech, and the like. And so I'm both an investor and an advisor to these organizations, and certainly have helped them in their fundraising aspects, understanding how they should be successful as they grow and become large establishments and enterprises. So thank you for having us here today.
And I'm Deb Hoover. I'm the president and CEO of the Burton D. Morgan Foundation, a private foundation that's based here in the greater Cleveland area. It was started by Burton D. Morgan almost 50 years ago. He was a serial entrepreneur and had a vision around entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education for Northeast Ohio. So we go about implementing that vision for him here. And we are a supporter of this MOOC, so we're very glad to be able to take the message about our Northeast Ohio entrepreneurial ecosystem globally. And then I also serve as chair of the Fund for Our Economic Future, which has also contributed significantly to our Northeast Ohio ecosystem.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Well, let's get right to it. And Mike, despite our inability here in Cleveland to hear what you're saying, I'm sure our web audience will enjoy your informed comments, and you can watch. And for those who are here, you guys can watch it later. Suzanne, let's go to the first question from the forum, please.
So we have a question, and it's from Greg Horn in Hawaii. What skin does the entrepreneur put in the game when accepting donations from donors or grants from the government? They are not providing these parties with equity. Is it like contributing to a Kickstarter campaign where there is other compensation?
Great, thanks, Greg. Mike, maybe you can start, because you, in your fundraising process for eFuneral, raised capital that came in the form, kind of like what Greg had mentioned, where it came through donors in the form of convertible debt and also grants. So you could probably speak to both pieces of the fundraising process
Sure.
as it was channeled through.
Sure. So here in Northeast Ohio, we have an interesting ecosystem in that there are funds available to entrepreneurs, to startups that aren't private funds. Those exist too, but these funds are coming from donors. There's an organization here in town, Jumpstart. Even Cuyahoga County as a government has a fund that is specific to entrepreneurs. We did receive an investment from Jumpstart, and as a part of that investment, it technically is not just a straight up donation. They invested in a convertible note. So even though they are are this philanthropic organization that's meant to foster the local economy here and the startup community as a whole here, really we treated their investment very similar to an investment that we took from an angel investor or even one of the venture capital groups that invested in our company. So we met with a representative from Jumpstart often on a weekly basis. This person was assigned to us, although there was a process that we went through to see who would be a good fit on the Jumpstart side. And that person acted as an advisor for us. They didn't join a formal board of directors, but they did join our board of advisors, and we treated that person as a close advisor, and he was very helpful in the process. Jumpstart as a whole, we had access to resources of theirs as well. So I would say in our specific case, it wasn't as simple as a Kickstarter campaign might be, where there's sort of, you know, preset benefits that you're going to give to somebody that's making a donation. But in our case, we really treated it, and I would say the whole process was really treated like this was a real investment coming from a venture capital group, because really the way that it was structured, it sort of was.
All right. And Deborah, maybe I'll bring you into the conversation on this question, because I think ultimately, I mean, the organization, and week 2 we'll be learning more about the role of intermediary organizations and Jumpstart specifically in next week's video. But maybe you can sort of mention from your perspective, because ultimately you're an investor in eFuneral, or you were an investor in eFuneral. Maybe you can talk about from your perspective, what are your expectations as a donor, as an investor into the not-for-profit Jumpstart that's deploying capital in eFuneral?
Sure, and so I think we need to look at this a little differently, because of course we're coming at it from the perspective of a private foundation, and so it is in line with our donors' intent. It is our mission to invest in entrepreneurship here in Northeast Ohio, and so we do that in a variety of ways. Obviously, we're funding programs that are providing services wrapping around what eFuneral was working on, but some of our dollars are also going toward the investments that are being made in the companies, and we as a private foundation, we're not getting return back for that. We're putting it into, say, an investment fund at Jumpstart. Those investments are made, and then there's potential equity coming back to Jumpstart, which in turn will help to fuel their services and programs for the future.
Great, thank you. Suzanne, another question?
Yes, we have a question from Theory in Haiti. I'm looking forward to start a foundation that will focus on funding startups, create networks, and high-end education. What would be the 2 most important facts I can bring in front of a philanthropist, knowing the economical and political instability in Haiti?
Maybe I'll put that to Mike on the Webex. I mean, Mike, I know that InfoDev and the World Bank are active in emerging economies like Haiti. How might you answer that question from your perspective at the World Bank, Mike?
Thanks, Mike. I'm just reading the Q&A here to get a better sense of that question. The World Bank doesn't work directly with entrepreneurs. We do work with foundations, other organizations that support entrepreneurs. The thing that we're looking for is really market discipline in the approach to supporting entrepreneurship. We're also looking for poverty impact, environmental impact, things like that. But really we want to see a well-run organization that has a market discipline in how it approaches its own investments and own support to entrepreneurs. So we're not here to support charities, we're here to support those who help to develop the overall private sector.
Great. And we can hear you now, Mike, so that's great. Suzanne, do you want to take the next question, and can we do a live, can we have it via audio now that we can hear? Will that work?
We have Robin, who said she wants to speak live.
Okay.
Robin, are you there?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Thanks for joining us. Where are you joining us from?
Hi, I'm Robin. I'm joining you guys from Düsseldorf in Germany. I'm currently studying here. Yeah, I was curious. First of all, you guys can hear me. The sound's clear, right? My question, I actually have 2 for all panelists, but perhaps there might be some who can better answer it. I'm curious about different levels of progress within different nations in supporting or approaching, facilitating philanthropy as well as entrepreneurship. can the panelists maybe speak to some of the different levels in perhaps maybe not so much developing countries, but developed countries? And following that, conversely, what entrepreneurs can do to further encourage more of these innovative ecosystems when they don't have such encouraging ecosystems.
Great questions. Deborah, maybe I'll start with you and then follow with Anand. If you can, I know you've done some work in Spain and some other places. If you've talked to philanthropies that have looked at what's happened here in Northeast Ohio, maybe you can comment on.
Sure. A little over a year ago, I went to Spain at the request of a group there that was looking at the relationship between entrepreneurship and philanthropy. And of course, Spain has been facing some very tough economic times, a lot of people out of work. And so a lot of people are thinking about starting their own ventures. And so this was an exploration of how the area around Madrid and beyond could support entrepreneurs. So I think that one way we can think about this is that the funds that go into philanthropy are generated through entrepreneurship. And so to be working with business people in a community to see how they can connect the work that they are doing in their business lives with perhaps getting involved in philanthropy. And there are a lot of ways that that can be done. It doesn't necessarily have to be done through their starting their own foundation. They can be doing it through corporate giving. They can be doing it through sharing their business practices and helping others to adapt those practices, to charitable giving that supports entrepreneurship. And so I know in Spain, the people that I talked with were, really intrigued, especially by what's happening here in Northeast Ohio, and definitely wanted to learn more. So I think looking out for examples in the States and other places and seeing how business people, how entrepreneurs are connecting the wealth that they have generated with philanthropic activity.
Great. And Anna, if you want to maybe address that second question, particularly kind of given the hat you wear as a private angel investor, but with a broader interest in impact and maybe sort of its donor looking at it a little bit differently than maybe a traditional foundation.
Absolutely, and I think, Michael, the other part of Robin's question was also around how to developed countries where entrepreneurship is not as strongly supported, how can those nations and people in those nations actually work on that? And so one of the aspects is there are things like in London today or in Hong Kong today, there's something called Fintech Innovation Lab that's specifically set up for fintech companies in developed nations in those geographies. And so as an example, the London Fintech Lab looks at how startups are actually founded in Germany, in France, and actually investing in them and bringing them into the lab to say, can we actually seed accelerate, can we incubate, and can we get to strong outcomes? So I think there are developed nations actually targeting other developed nations to be able to bring out the idea of entrepreneurship and to be able to fund and fuel that particular ecosystem. To your point around impact, so one of the things is I thought about this week's lecture, which was focused around being a donor and having in making donations as opposed to actually considering it as just a return on investment. One of the things I look at is what are impacts that actually the organization's having, the startup is actually having, in order to decide whether to fund from a donation standpoint or to fund only as an angel investor looking for a specific return on investment. So as an example, there are a lot of, the healthcare field actually lends itself to this very well. There are a number of startups in healthcare field across the world that are focused around, that are actually for-profit organizations, for-profit startups, but they are having a major impact in the way they impact economies, they impact communities, and therefore there are a lot of investors who actually take off their investor hat, put on their donor hat and say, I want to donate towards actually solving this particular medical problem or medical situation that this company is gone and tackled in Africa or in Asia or in Europe or wherever else. And so I find it that when those startups that focus more on impact and what is the actual impact they're having in their community, when they do a good job articulating that, the donor community actually comes out very quickly to say, I want to be able to fund and I want to be able to participate as a donor for startups in there, as opposed to just thinking about the investment vehicle. So that's what I've seen.
Thanks, Anand. We have another question from the chat room, and thank you, Robin, for your question.
Yes, this question comes from Greg Horn in Hawaii.
I think we already did Greg.
This is another question.
All right, it's a different question. Nothing? Okay, all right, let me go to my, all right, those in the Webex, you don't get 2 questions until we get to some of these other ones. All right, we had a question that was an interesting one from Soparith Sin from Cambodia, who asked whether the involvement of donors in supporting entrepreneurs might lead to a confrontation, is the way they frame it, between donors and government regarding policy. I mean, Deborah, maybe you're well suited to ask that, and then I'll kick it over to Mike for his perspective. I mean, where do donors and government sort of come together and see eye to eye, or where may there be areas where you're not totally in sync?
Well, and I can speak to this question from our experience here in Ohio and Northeast Ohio. And I think that you know, the money that has been invested through the Ohio Third Frontier, for example, requires a very significant match in order to be able to access those dollars. Those dollars have been critical to the success of our ecosystem here. And so it's been the responsibility of Philanthropy to step up and to match those dollars so that we're able to access them and invest them fully here in the region. And I would say from my perspective as a philanthropist that that's been a highly successful program and a highly successful partnership that we've been able to forge with government through the Ohio Third Frontier program. And we're really delighted that, you know, that we're able to continue that partnership right now.
Great. And Mike, let me flip it over to you. I mean, obviously in both the structure of the World Bank and in some of the places you work with, you sort of are straddling that. You're a donor, but you're representing, your resources are typically coming from government. Be curious sort of on your perspective on that donor-government relationship in the markets that you work in.
Thanks. It's a really excellent question. We deal with this pretty much every day. There's always a lot of interest from governments on supporting entrepreneurship. And then we have to figure out how to channel that interest to provide, you know, a good environment for entrepreneurship, to provide perhaps some co-financing, but to kind of keep the governments from trying to run things in a hands-on way. Some governments are used to being involved into every program that's run, so they see a program in entrepreneurship and they want to suggest who should be in charge of it or which companies should get access to the funding. Those are the things we really try to keep the government out of, and it's really a political challenge. So you do absolutely want the support of the local government, the national government, but you also need to channel that energy and enthusiasm to the right areas. And that's not the running of a hands-on entrepreneurship program, which should really be left to entrepreneurs, mentors, the folks that do this every day and know entrepreneurship.
We had another question from the forum that was talking about the shift. So it was Raul de la Fuente Puente from Spain. That's a mouthful of a name. But thanks for your question, Raul. And I'm going to pose it to you, Mike. He talked about this shift, and we've sort of seen it here in Northeast Ohio, where traditional philanthropy has been supporting the arts and social welfare. How does philanthropic community shift from supporting these kind of entities to something like entrepreneurship? I mean, you are a local person, grew up here, decided to start your company here. I mean, how, as you made a decision to kind of start your company here versus starting it in another place and moving where there may have been resources, I mean, how important was it for that commitment sort of philanthropy and maybe government together to sort of provide you with the resources to do it here versus going somewhere else?
Well, I will say, when we first got started for eFuneral, one of the things that really pushed us, you know, I had, eFuneral started because my cousin died, and it was a total unexpected situation that my family had to go through, and we were put in that process that all families have to go through in terms of figuring out what to do, and part of that was finding the funeral home, right? So when that all had happened with my family, I was it bothered me, the situation that we went through, especially the fact that there isn't a lot of information that you can use to find out about local funeral homes and what might set one apart from the other. So I started on this sort of personal path and really trying to figure this information out. One of the things that was a catalyst for us was the fact that the state of Ohio launched this accelerator program locally called the 10 Accelerator. And it was modeled after similar accelerator programs like Y Combinator and Techstars that are happening throughout the country. But I was at the point in my life where it was important. I had a family, I had a mortgage, where we did it in Cleveland and or in Ohio, but we wanted to really start the business in Cleveland. There were 0 accelerators at the time in Cleveland, but this was just starting in Columbus, which was close enough for us to really say, hey, wait a minute, maybe this is something where if we could push ourselves to apply and get in, this might be the push that sort of allows us to take that leap. But the other thing that I'll mention that the person who brought this question brought up is the fact that there are, and you had talked about this earlier, there are investors that take a philanthropic look at investing. It's not just purely about the dollars and cents. And I'll say, aside from the dollars that we got from the grant from the 10 Accelerator, the first couple of investors that invested in us, they are angel investors here locally, but they're personal mentors of mine. And they cared about us. They cared about me as a person. And did they want to see their investment turn into something big? Sure. Well, you know, why wouldn't they? But really, they were looking at their investment as a personal investment in me. Right. And that meant a lot to know that there were people here that really took that viewpoint.
Right. And I'm going to add a question in from Lucas Kocheni from the Czech Republic and address it to Anand, and sort of it's following on the same. He basically says, how does one promote a culture of giving? Certainly educating potential donors and creating incentives, i.e. tax deductions, are helpful, but it seems like the bigger underlying problem is the lack of the share mindset and the culture of the people. Maybe you can sort of think about that, and particularly because you play a mentoring role with a lot of the angel investments that you get into. I mean, how critical kind of is that piece to be able to sort of directly connect and support people kind of regardless of what they're going to pay you back on your investment?
So I think, Michael, what's been interesting is as investing in startups has evolved from a way to seed, accelerate, and fund concepts that might give you an ROI to being what is the impact that that particular organization will have in the community, to now a lot of investors have actually taken this form of I'll donate time and money to startups. And so one of the roles I play, there's several startups that I don't fund from a financial perspective, but I will donate a significant amount of my time to say I will advise, I'll actually provide that mentorship and coaching and drive that. And there are numerous investors around the world who actually take that philosophy to say, can I help where I may not have the funds to actually donate right away, but I'll donate at the right time? Or can I actually donate my time today and start making an impact today in the organization? And I love that community of mentors. It becomes such a critical element to allow these startups to say, I'm creating my board of advisors, I do have some funding sources, but I have the right people. A great example was actually Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos. So Elizabeth was a second-year Stanford student. She dropped out of college to form Theranos about 9 years ago, the youngest female billionaire today. If you actually think about what she's doing, she is actually creating a capability that is in medicine, and it's in a field that's evolved. She created mentors who did not donate, who did not actually give money from an investment standpoint, but they donated to her. They also donated their time. Governments around the world donated time to Elizabeth because of the cause that she was on and what she was actually doing. Yes, the company's for-profit, multi-billion-dollar company today in valuation, but she took a very different approach. She said, I want to create a set of advisors and I need a set of mentors who can donate your time, donate your mind share to allow me to be very successful in this. And I think that's a great example, and there are a lot of other startups like that are great examples that have achieved that successfully.
Great. Let me ask a question also from the chat room that I'd like Deb and Mike to address, and it has to do with sort of measuring outcomes and expectations for success. So it's Julian Bouchard from France, who would like the panel to discuss the extent which donor attitudes and expectations are about what they get back from their donation and how that sort of varies
from country and culture. So maybe, Deborah, you can address it kind of in your perspective here, and then we can toss it over to Mike for that broader international view.
Sure. So I'll have to address this from the perspective of a private foundation. And so it is really our mission to help to build a culture of entrepreneurship here in our region. And so this was what our donor expected us to achieve for the foundation. And it is, in fact, what we work on day in and day out. And so what we get back from it, I think, is, feelings that we have successfully achieved the mission that our donors set out for us. And so that means different things in different areas of funding. And so we've been talking today mostly about what we fund in the adult entrepreneurship space. And so there we're looking at things like follow-on capital, jobs created, mentorship relationships created. But we're also funding entrepreneurship for younger people. So starting really in the lower grades on up through middle school and high school, and then on into the college years. And so while it's wonderful when we're seeing students building their own businesses, be that a lemonade stand or a tech company maybe during their college years, at the end of the day, those kinds of experiences are really about the educational value. So we're really there hoping to measure, the learning experiences that those students have achieved through the programs that we support. So it just varies, just the different kinds of programs that we support.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. Mike, can you address it from the InfoDev World Bank perspective?
Yeah, certainly. So we put to work funding from a variety of different donor sources, but a lot of them are European governments that are doing development work around the world. And they're really looking for development impact. And so that can be defined in a variety of ways, which is the challenge. It can be growth of the private sector. It could be access to clean water. It could be access to energy. So just to give you an example, InfoDev, my part of the World Bank, supports an innovation center on clean technologies in Kenya. And we support a variety of entrepreneurs in Kenya who are doing off-grid energy access. They're doing solutions for clean water. They're doing sustainable agriculture. And we've got a number of donors that support that. Some of them are interested in how many new households get connected to electricity. Others are interested in how many new jobs are produced or how much new revenues are produced, how many new companies are created and sustained. So we have to meet a variety of targets, and really it's a matter of knowing up front what the donor is interested in, because if they're interested in something that's not, in the end, supporting the entrepreneur the way that we think they should be, then we have to be careful of which donor money to take.
We have a question from the chat room.
We do. We have a question from Rini from Seoul, Korea. What do donors and philanthropists expect from donating to startups rather than NGOs and NPOs related in the same field when they are not expecting ROI?
Okay, and it's interesting, and it may depend. Deborah, I don't know if you want to get the perspective. I know in the U.S. context, there's certain things that you can or can't do, but maybe you can comment on that.
Right. So through the foundation, we're not investing directly in entrepreneurs. We, as a matter of course, we're not really permitted under the Internal Revenue Code to do that. So we're mainly investing in the not-for-profit organizations that serve as support entities for entrepreneurs. But as I said, some of our dollars are going directly, through these venture development organizations to support the investment expenses for these startup companies. But those dollars are not coming directly from the foundation.
I think, Michael, if you don't mind, I have a perspective. I've actually donated to a startup that did not succeed at the end of the day, but I donated because, and in terms of what I was looking for, that particular team was working on, again, it was in the healthcare space. They were actually working on a specific set of cures. And what they ended up doing is actually igniting a number of other startups that actually formed because of the type of work that they did. So what happened is there's now companies called Bayes Impact. There's another startup. These are all many of these are Y Combinator companies, but Bayes Impact. There's another one called the Immunity Project that's focused on HIV. These are startups. They are founded by a small set of individuals who are now nonprofits. These are not-for-profit startups. But what's interesting is actually engaging with it as a donor, I looked for what will this actually create in the ecosystem. So maybe they may or may not cure what they're looking to cure. However, what will they trigger? And what they did trigger is an amazing volume of other startups and other companies and other government agencies that were ready to fund ideas in this space. Again, it was very healthcare focused, but I really enjoyed watching that, and I feel I got something out of it. I'm actually now an advisor to a number of those companies without having, I actually don't have to donate to a lot of the companies that they brought me on. I get advisor shares, or I get other types of compensation for being on there without having to make a donation. But it did actually expose me to a lot of different individuals and groups that way.
So I just wanted to add another nuance to this discussion, which I think is important, at least in the context of giving in the United States, and that is around program-related investments. I've been talking so far from the perspective of grant making, where those dollars are given outright to an organization. But a program-related investment is a way that a private foundation like ours can give to an organization like Jumpstart, and then Jumpstart would use those resources to provide services to help grow ventures. And then, the ideal scenario is where those ventures, are successful, and then are giving equity to Jumpstart, and then an organization like Jumpstart would be able to pay back the program-related investment to the foundation, and thereby we'd be able to recycle those dollars. So that's another way of thinking about giving.
And on the video lecture this week, we talk a little bit about some foundations from, as Deb mentions, not on the grant side, but are investing as limited partners into venture capital funds. So that's another option. Let's take a question from the chat room, please.
We have a question from Mahmoud from Gombe, Nigeria. African technology innovation is less cultivated due to lack of technical know-how by African individuals. So, who do we pitch our ideas to secure funding?
Mike, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to. That's I would challenge a little bit that some of the technologies in Africa are not as advanced as other places. Certainly there's less activity overall, but there's also some very highly technical solutions that we see in Africa. The folks at iHub in Kenya have developed this brick, which is an all-the-time solution for Wi-Fi when you're out in the savannah in Kenya. So there's certain very technical things that are coming out of Africa. From the standpoint of who you pitch to, there's more and more investors going into Africa. The challenge is it's this really early stage space that's lacking investment. Even what's called impact investors now are looking for, 700,000 and plus type of deals, where what's really needed is a lot of financing for these early stage companies. So at the 50,000, 100,000, 250,000 range. That's the space that we're trying to fill. There are some angel networks growing, but a lot of this depends on you reaching out to personal networks overseas, reaching out to foundations that are doing proof of concept grants, these type of things. So the space is filling in, but Africa is still not quite as mature, especially in the early stage ecosystem, except for a few places like Nairobi and Johannesburg and one or two other spots.
To you, Anand. One of the things that's intriguing as we've gotten to know each other and learning about your portfolio, and you're modest on some of the companies, some of the small companies in your portfolio as an angel investor include Dropbox or Airbnb that have really scaled and done amazingly well. I was intrigued by something you told me earlier this year, where you said that you're willing to look. I mean, you're sort of sitting in the heart of Silicon Valley, great access to Y Combinator deals, but your willingness to actually look outside of the Valley and to even globally at opportunities. Maybe you can sort of comment on that, because I think to the gentleman from Nigeria who asked the question, I mean, are there, and Mike sort of referred to it, are there sort of diaspora or other types of networks where an entrepreneur in Nigeria could actually get an audience via an angel list or other ways with somebody like yourself in Silicon Valley?
I think it's a great point. So yes, some of the work that we've started to do as an angel network in California is actually extend well beyond California. So first step we took was to look at places like Arkansas. So we didn't go too far out of the U.S. But first step we took is to say, startups cannot just be in California. There are definitely startups around the world that are very successful. We extended it to say, what does the U.S. look like? And there were companies out of Ohio, there are companies out of Arkansas, there's companies out of I think there's one out of Buffalo, New York, et cetera, that have actually come into to seed accelerators like Y Combinator. So we extended the search. We then extended the search outside of that to say, let's go to the developed nations in around the world. So we have several startups that have gone through Y Combinator around from France, from Germany, from the UK, other parts of Asia, and then we said, let's go to emerging economies. And so individual angels who, like myself, who actually don't have visibility into all of that, tap into networks like Y Combinator to say, let's see what's actually out there around the world. And so we looked at, and so my portfolio now includes companies out of India, companies out of China, and also companies out of Middle East and others. And so Africa is something where we actually are spending more time trying to understand better to say, and I think Mike East just made a great comment, we don't know exactly how to observe and actually evaluate companies coming out of Africa today. We want to do more of that. So as independent angels, we're actually spending more time learning about those startups that are successful in those markets, and we're extending our reach to say, let's have startup schools, or let's have startup forums, or let's have communication. And I would just say, whether it's Techstars, whether a lot of the Silicon Valley-based accelerators that look way beyond the U.S., plug into those networks, because they certainly are providing a lot of access to people around the world, and they're accepting applications from absolutely everywhere, flying individuals in. They've even gone so far as giving visas. So one of the big thing is companies like startup accelerators like Y Combinator work with the Immigration and Nationalization Service to get visas for founders in other countries to actually come onshore, be here in the U.S. for a couple of weeks to get mentored, to get coached, and then be able to go back to Africa and go back to India. But they are working on their behalf to get them visas, get them access to people here in the U.S. And I think that's a very powerful tool to plug into a lot of those networks. And I think AngelList, and that's the last comment I'll make really quickly there, AngelList has been an incredible way for companies around the world to get discovered. They post on AngelList, they create syndicate lists, and very quickly, again, individual investors like me who search AngelList for companies, I look on there, I'm listed on AngelList, so founders reach out to me, but I reach out to them to say, what is it you're really doing, and what is the space you're into? And now it's making a very global world almost local. And in San Francisco, I'm evaluating companies in over 15 different countries today.
Great. I have a question from Amina Alami from Morocco, and I want to kind of bring it local. She asked a broader question, but I want to bring Deb and Mike Belcito into this conversation. She said that she's experienced some success stories where philanthropies have shifted away from giving a man a fish to teaching a man how to fish. We're sitting here, and Mike in his introduction referred to the e-funeral journey, which I think he learned, he benefited, but ultimately it didn't work out like everybody hoped. Mm-hmm. He's on to his sort of next adventure, and when you watch, actually you'll see Mike in the video on eFuneral later, and actually when we filmed the MOOC, eFuneral is alive and moving. From your perspective, Deborah, I mean, here's sort of a live example of one of your portfolio companies through some of the support mechanisms that you help support. He failed. Was it worth the investment?
So this is a great question, and this is a question that's really near and dear to our heart because our founder really celebrated his failures. He was big into mentoring, and so he used his failures as much to instruct people as he did his successes. So, and I think it's a culture that we've kind of lost in our country, and we need to regain that failure is not only okay. Look, Mike is here with us, and he is sharing what he learned. So there's huge value in that. So are you going to start another company?
Oh yeah.
So there you go. So I think we have to celebrate that. And so no, I don't see that as a failure. I see it as a beginning, and I think it'll be foundational in your life experiences, and you'll be able to point that back to this experience as you're building your next venture. So and I think that's an ethos that we try to build into our work with the foundation itself. I mean, if we're going to focus on entrepreneurship, we need to be entrepreneurial ourselves, which includes accepting failure. It means we need to be taking risks, and it means that we are probably going to fail sometimes too, and we have, and we learn from it just the way entrepreneurs do.
Well, first of all, thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I appreciate that. And I'll say, when eFuneral ultimately did wind down, and people became aware of it, to me, it's when I really realized that the Cleveland startup community here in Northeast Ohio has really turned a corner. Because when you're starting a company, you try not to think about the failure part of it. Sometimes you do, and that actually prevents you from starting in the first place. But we tried to push that out of our minds, right? But now here we were. I was in this very real situation, and at that point in time, I'm wondering, well, gosh, am I going to get run out of Cleveland? Now did I just lose all my credibility? And it was the opposite. There were opportunities that came my way that wouldn't have come my way if we didn't start eFuneral. I had other startup founders that had businesses that were up and running, that were actually successful, that were turning to me for peer mentoring, which I in turn was turning to them for as well. Actually, that's one of the awesome things that I've really discovered over the last 3 years is how powerful peer mentoring can be. But I've had these other young startups that are just getting started that have turned to me to say, hey, what do we do? Would you mind advising us? And I just failed, right? So who am I to advise anybody? But that's when I realized we're in this startup ecosystem where we have to support each other. And failing, I don't want to necessarily call it a good thing, but we could all learn from it. And I know that it's made me so much more, maybe more of a grizzled entrepreneur now as I go through the process. So the next one, maybe we can avoid some of the things that we went through the first time that maybe led to some of those failures. So, but I will say in Northeast Ohio, I've seen a lot of that change for the better, and I'm really encouraged by that.
Great.
Anand, let me ask you a question that came in from the chat room from Meredith Robertson. And she talks about kind of what's good stewardship and practices on the part of an entrepreneur after an investment or a donation has been made. I mean, how important is this communication? I mean, to me, when I hear Mike and Deb talk, part of, I think, Mike's success with something that didn't work out is his ability to communicate along the way. I mean, how critical is that for the many investments that you do? I mean, how often are you, and you may not be the biggest investor in there, how often are you hearing from the entrepreneur, and how important is that if it doesn't work out, that communication piece was strong?
Yeah, I think that's, so naturally I'm not the biggest investor in any of the startups, but I actually become, in about 10 or 12 of them, I've become one of the most important investors. It's because of the communication channel. When a Ron Conway, a super angel like him, or a Yuli Milner invests, they literally invest out of a fund, and they don't invest their own time in all the hundreds and hundreds of companies that they fund. When Anand Swaminathan invests in one of my 35 companies, I take a personal interest, and I actually have a lot of time to give to those organizations. And so what I do look for from entrepreneurs is a very strong communication channel back. So founders who will actually talk to me, who will actually bring me in on decisions, who will actually engage and ask for advice when they want the advice, are some of the best entrepreneurs out there, because what they've done is they've actually found the ability to learn very quickly from multiple sources, and they're able to be extremely successful with that existing startup, but then they also where they go next. So both with startups that are hugely successful. A great example was actually Stripe is a startup that I've invested in. This company now is worth several $1 billion in valuation. And what's interesting is they come to me, and I'm one of the smallest investors in Stripe and early investors, and what they do is they said, how do I enter Brazil on? And then I'm going, my gosh, you have access to just about everyone you can talk to on how to enter the Brazilian payments market. They wanted my opinion because of one capability that I had launched in Brazil for one of my clients a couple years ago. And I thought, that's great, spending that time, having that open dialogue. We as investors crave that communication. We actually feel quite in the dark when entrepreneurs don't communicate with us or don't give us updates. And when we get it, gosh, it's usually an outpouring of support that entrepreneurs will get from most investors. Deb?
Sure, please.
Add to that, and I think you raised some really great points. When we think about this from a private foundation's perspective, the way that we work with our grantees, we're really more working along the lines of venture philanthropy. So we're working hand in hand every day with what's going on. We're out there observing, we're out there troubleshooting, we're getting feedback as to what's going on, rarely being surprised because we're working so closely with people. And so we're able to make those mid-course corrections along the way and then get things back on track if there's a problem.
Right. We, for those watching via Webex, we're actually here at Case Western with a room full of alumni and folks on campus, so we're going to take a local question here. Bob, if you can stand and maybe face the camera so we can face our international audience, and we'll let the people in the room see your back and they can see your front.
That's
right?
That's fine. But,
okay.
Oh, okay, thank you. Mike, this goes back to you. I know the other entrepreneurs are now looking to you as, unfortunately, the poster child. But you and I had a discussion a couple months ago that what your investors who really had skin in the game, what they said to you, as this thing was winding down.
Yeah, well, I will say we took the approach of communicating with investors throughout the entire life of eFuneral. So that was just something we believed in. It just felt like the right thing to do. So, and not every investor of ours necessarily wanted to have the same level of communication. There were some that would love to meet for coffee every week if we were all available. There are some that it was more, hey, just keep me in the loop every now and then. And so we respected that. But what I will say is when the times got really tough, right, those investors that we had engaged were rolling their sleeves up with us, and they were trying to help us work through some of those big challenges. When the time came where we actually had to wind things down, because we had that deep engagement with them, they were disappointed, but they weren't disappointed in us. They were disappointed for us. Like, they felt the same sort of ownership as we did because they were there along with us, the whole time. So in terms of what did they say at the very end, I'll never forget, and this was a humbling moment for me. There was an investor that he wasn't one of the first investors in the company. He didn't personally know me before eFuneral. He learned about us along the way and decided that he wanted to get to know us and ultimately decided to invest. But I didn't have that personal connection with him before eFuneral. And when I had to give the message to him that, hey, it's time. We're exploring some acquirers right now, but we have to let the team go. We're at that stage right now. His response to me was, well, I've been there before, and let me know when you want to start your next company because I want to invest in that.
That's the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, and it blew my mind because again, I'm sitting here thinking, well, gosh, why would he have responded that way? But he was there with us, even if it wasn't, he actually wasn't in Cleveland, but he was there with us along the way, and that level of engagement meant a lot to him too.
Great. Suzanne, we have a question from the chat room.
We actually have Nicole, and she is at a meetup right now in Cairo.
Great.
So they have some questions for you from Cairo.
Okay, great. Hey, Nicole.
Hi there. Hi. So yeah, we have a question in the room. Veronica's going to ask. Hello.
Hi, we wanted to ask, we have a lot of really great organizations and NGOs, and a lot of them have created really great programs and incubators and accelerators for startups. Do you have an ideal suggestion or advice at what stage NGOs and donors should be involved at the life cycle of a startup? Should it be creating programs, mentoring? Should it be seed stage funding? You know, at what part is the ideal part for an NGO to be involved?
Thanks, Nicole. Great question. Maybe, Deb, I'll let you address it. And Nicole, thank you so much for your efforts in getting people together in Cairo in person. It's really awesome, I think, to have the MOOC experience, sharing it with other people just sort of live in person. Deb, maybe you can...
So I just want to make sure I heard the question correctly. So it's about at what stage should programs address in the startup process?
The way I heard it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. And that's a great question, and I think there are opportunities for support, you know, throughout the continuum of the startup process. So I think, you know, very early stage, such as the mentorship and the services that that eFuneral was receiving, really important. Wrapping, you know, not only those resources but mentorship around it, so that you're engaging, you know, a broader spectrum of your community and bringing up that startup. But then I think there's opportunities too for looking at existing companies, what we call gazelles, companies that are up and operating and may have a line of business that they've been thinking about but need some support to do the research or build their networks to advance that product line. And so that's something that we're working on here in Northeast Ohio, to adapt the systems that we have in place to be able to address those issues that existing companies have, maybe middle market companies, in looking at growth potential for product lines.
Great. And Mike, do you want to give, Mike East, do you want to address that from where you sit at the bank, if any perspectives on that advice for the folks in Cairo?
Yeah, I mean, it's really context dependent. So, you know, we here at the World Bank, we love our data. So before we do any sort of program supporting entrepreneurship, we go in and we essentially survey what's there and what's missing. So some countries may have lots of early stage capital, but they have no legal and other type of support for entrepreneurs. Others might have lots of accelerators, but they have no seed capital. So we try to tailor our programs for each particular context. So I think ideally, you know, in the long term, you want a Silicon Valley where you don't need as much philanthropic or donor support, but there's very, very few places that have that. So I think the role of a good donor or philanthropist is to go in and fill the gaps that are missing. And I think that's what you guys have done a little bit in Northeast Ohio. And it's what we try to do differently in each country we move into, because there are different challenges, whether it's financing or mentorship or development of a market sometimes, or laws, bankruptcy laws for folks that have problems after they start a business. So it just depends on the context, but to fill the gaps is where the philanthropist should go.
Suzanne, I know we have a question from the chat room.
We do. We have a question from Veronica, and Veronica is actually also in Cairo. Can we discuss more ways to engage donors and avoid donor fatigue?
Who wants to start that? Deb, you want to?
I can start that. Again, a really important question, and it is, a problem that plagues the philanthropic community. But I think if you're going to be involved in the economic development world, working on the economic competitiveness of a region, that you are in it for the long haul. This is not something where you're going to be able to swoop in and in a couple of years change a culture, and build up a robust ecosystem. If you're going to work in this field, you really got to be in there to make long-term investments, and as I said, be working hand in hand with the people who are on the ground doing the work.
Great. And I think this will be our last question of the day. And just Sean, if you can just look at the camera as you ask a question. Great, thanks.
I'm on it or not. All right. But yeah, Deshaun Jackson, I'm an alum of Case Western as well. And one thing I wanted to ask about was we talked a lot about personal donations and even philanthropic donations, but can we talk more about how to engage corporations who are very numbers driven to get them more to give back in some of these more philanthropic opportunities as well?
That's a great question. And I don't know if you want to take that one first. I mean, when you think about, because it looks different. I mean, frankly, here in Northeast Ohio, we haven't seen corporate support of entrepreneurship as being as big of a pillar as we've seen kind of in the foundation community. I think in other markets, particularly internationally, you're seeing corporates through their foundations doing more. Do you have any perspective?
So a couple thoughts on that. I'm actually finding banks are creating funds where they're actually donating to startups. But what they like to do is control the startup. So as a corporation, a great example, Wells Fargo just launched a seed accelerator fund out in California. Some of the companies will drive significant profit, do other things, but Wells Fargo is not taking a stake in those companies. They're actually donating effort. They actually bring you into their labs. They sit down. You can actually work with the bank, and you get access to a lot of resources. They donate money as well to help fund some of that, but they're giving a lot of knowledge share, time, a space to work, and they're donating other kinds of resources like that as well. I think corporations like that, primarily, again, in each industry, there's specific types of organizations that take it. In financial services, banks are the ones doing it because they believe they have the most to lose when it comes to technology startups that are actually happening. So they want to be partnering with companies that are thinking about financial inclusion. They want to partner with companies that want to do better in payments. So it's a matter of engaging those corporations is finding organizations that really care about those causes and are already created and talk publicly about their funds and how they're investing and how they're donating. They do exist. It depends on which industry, and then I've not seen it in all, naturally across all industries, but certain industries, companies are doing quite a bit, and everyone now has a fund. It's kind of like every corporation feels they're cool if they have a investment fund, and they have no idea how to measure the results of those funds. They have no idea whether that's a good thing. Cities and governments are doing it. The Partnership of New York Fund went and created where they got a whole bunch of banks, they got a whole bunch of companies to come in to say, we will act as a corporation. And the Partnership of New York created a corporation to say, we will basically bring in other corporations to be able to donate and to be able to invest in startups. And so I think they exist in different markets, but it's still quite in the nascent stages that corporations are figuring out what to do with funds because they feel that's a good way to engage with the community and engage with startups.
Good. Well, on that note, thanks, panelists, for taking the time here in Cleveland. Mike, thank you for joining us. All right, the local audience is applauding. Thank you for attending, local audience. And thanks, everybody, for joining the Webex. We'll be back with you on Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So my apologies to the students in Asia. It's going to be the middle of your night. But we're trying to mix them up each week on sort of time. And we'll be talking about NGOs, nonprofit organizations that was referred to today, and the role that NGOs or intermediaries play in supporting entrepreneurship. So see you in the chat rooms. If anybody didn't get a chance to ask a question during the forum and want to, just please post it in the forums, and we can encourage our panelists to hop into the chat rooms and maybe ask them that way. So have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you.